What's So Funny? Lessons from Canada's Leacock Medal for Humor Writing by Dick Bourgeois Doyle. Lesson number 1. Be careful how you judge an old book. This is a review of the 1947 winner of the Leacock Medal for Humor, the very first winner, Ojibway Melody, Stories of Georgian Bay by Harry Simons. The two-story 19th century manor sits in a leafy established part of Peterborough. I'm glad I didn't know about the house before I entered it. Learning within its walls convinced me that I was onto something. He used to live here, in fact. I bought the house from him, my host said to me in reference to a former famous inhabitant. The cordial speaker, Professor Tom Simons, shared this morsel and some other funny stories with me as we discussed my interest in the Leacock Medal books. Simons and his wife Christine had invited me to their home for lemon cake and a cup of tea. My wife and I made the trip from Ottawa in early 2013. Not to see the house, not to hear about its past, and not to eat. Michelle came along because she likes road trips. I came to learn more about Tom's father, Harry Lutz Simons, the author of Ojibway Melody, that 1947 Leacock Medal book. Little had been published about Harry, and I wanted access to the family archives at Trent University. All I knew for sure about Harry Simons was that he loved his cottage near Point O'Barrel on Georgian Bay, and saw it as his sanctuary. With Ojibway Melody, he tried to share it, guiding us around the islands, pointing out the good fishing spots, and describing the locals. The book can leave you with the feel of a warm handshake, a pat on the back, and a canoe ride on sparkling waters. Given Stephen Leacock's association with Ontario cottage country, the 1947 medal judges probably felt this book made a fitting first winner of the award, established in Leacock's honor. Yet, it struck me, initially, as a puzzle. The writing seems like a stream of consciousness, nothing like the one-liners, jokes, or comic stories that we consume as humor today. Ojibway Melody merrily pours out a medley. Hunting trips, the legend of Turtle Rock, the whiskey barrel that gave Point O'Barrel its name, the crow Black Lucy, the rookery of lake birds, and Regatta Day, with all its fun and laughter and excitement, and crowds and ice cream and pop and noise. At times the book reads like a transcription of musings over events just as they unfolded, like this unedited bit of narration. For a while, but hold on a moment, perhaps that was, it might just possibly have been, well, you know. And so it goes. Harry Simons shifts the verb tense and the perspective of the narrator regularly. The only consistency comes from his affection for the local focal. Boats and fishing, canoes, inboards, outboards, and rowboats. Pike, lunge, and bass. Early in the book, you might think Simons wrote it to celebrate the Ojibway Hotel. But then he talks about the hotel with caution, saying he did not lust for places where ties and collars were the norm. Harry says that if such a lifestyle ever takes over Georgian Bay, the area will have lost its savor, and the ageless rocks will arise in all their dignity and crumble into dust. When I read this passage, I started to understand. It sounded like something I'd heard others say when I was young, and was the kind of thing my own father would have thought. I began to regard Harry Simons as my own dad, counseling me, raconteur style, to slow down and lighten up a bit. In this way, Harry praised simple pleasures. He said, "First, we swing our feet out of bed and dangle them over the side and keep our toes off the floor, just in case it's cold. And then we yawn a good deal and grumble and flex our arms and wish we were back in bed. And quite often, we just give up and crawl back in again." This kind of talk humored my father's generation because that generation was struggling with the strains of careers, family, and a changing society. And in the 1940s, Canadians also wanted to think about things other than war. Ojibway Melody, though it was written in 1944 and 1945, met that need. It only mentions the World War II context in a vague reference to the labor shortage in wartime. So, the incongruity of this book exists not in the text alone, but between its dark background and its cheery content. Harry Simons had a special reason to block out the violence and to seek refuge in the boats and fishing around Georgian Bay. Born in Toronto in 1893, Harry loved physical exertion and the outdoors. He even quarterbacked for the Toronto Argonauts, served as a captain of a varsity football team, and sailed competitively. He spent summers on a survey crew camping and hiking through the wilderness around Georgian Bay. The beauty of the forests and the waters fixed in his head and would turn out to be important to his psyche and survival. And when World War I broke out in 1914, Harry Simons left school and joined the army to serve on the front lines in Europe, where his mind clenched onto those images of the islands around the bay. In August 1916, he transferred to the Royal Flying Corps in the cockpit of a Sopwith Camel. Harry survived, and he scored enough kills to place him in the ace category, yet he never talked much about the war. And after his death in 1961, aviation historians described his exploits as unknown to all but the most diligent researchers. The future Leacock medalist did not consider the wartime heroics nearly as important as his post-plane crash stay in an English hospital. That's where he met a nurse named Dorothy. After he returned to Canada with Dorothy by his side, he bought the Georgian Bay cottage, Yaktangee, put the war behind him, pursued a career in real estate and insurance, and started a family that would eventually include Tom and 7 other children. Tom Simons talked to me on the phone about this sort of stuff and had sent me some records, as well as having invited me to his Peterborough home, which I learned only after taking off my boots and sitting down carries formal designation as Marchbank's House, a historic site and former home of novelist Robertson Davies. Davies, in fact, wrote his own Leacock Medal-winning novel in this house. W.O. Mitchell and others, also honored by the Leacock Prize, regularly visited the place and sat in the chair that held my butt that early 2013 afternoon. Tom, who also showed me the artist's cast for the first Leacock Medal, told me all this to encourage me in my project of reviewing Leacock Medal books. He wanted in particular to share the story of his dad's book, Ojibway Melody, and the story of the impact it has had on the academic study of Canada. He said, "The book means a great deal to me. I often think of it because it gives me answers when I'm considering things. It helps as a compass when I have difficult chores from time to time," said Professor Simons. "First of all, it reads the way my father talked, and I enjoy that. I can hear his voice, but I also hear his respect and his concern for others. The book is all about it, between the lines sometimes." Professor Simons was touched in particular by his father's empathy for the Ojibway people. He said, "That chapter is superb, and I was raised with that concern. I'm sure that that's one of the reasons Trent was the first university in Canada to have a Department of Native Studies." Tom Simons was the first president of that university and a founder of the field of Canadian Studies. In fact, he served as chair of the 1970s National Commission on the subject of Canada. The Commission's 1976 report, To Know Ourselves, set out the roadmap for the subsequent study of Canada and the promotion of Canadians as a people that mix sensitivity with conviction, qualities that Simons saw in his dad's book, Ojibway Melody. "My own interest in the rapport between French and English people is drawn from that book," said Tom. "You sometimes don't recognize the deeper values of the author because it is written so amiably, but the book is a touchstone for me and the things I value." So, this conversation convinced me that every Canadian could benefit from a trip to the cottage described in the first Leacock Medal-winning book. And again, it made me think I might be onto something with this project. It also gave me hope that a person who, like the book Ojibway Melody, is well over 60 years old and a little tattered on the edges, might still have something worthwhile to say about Canadian humor. Now here's a writing exercise that draws on the style of Ojibway Melody. In the voice of a former fishing guide from Georgian Bay, describe your first day at work as a stockbroker on Bay Street in 1987.